Welcome to the TTS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards, and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello, my name is Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and I'm your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. In the first series of the TTS Talking Early Years podcast, we are exploring the amazing adventures you can have in outdoor learning. And I'm going to talk to a number of global experts to inspire your everyday work and unlock that potential for the amazing outdoors. And in today's episode, I am delighted to introduce Mel McCree, who's an internationally renowned scholar of forest schools, and Sarah Lawfull, education consultant and chair of the Forest Schools Association. Good afternoon, both of you.
Hello.
Sarah, just to start with you, for anybody that hasn't come across you or your work before, could you give us a little brief introduction of who you are and what's brought you to today's podcast?
Thank you, Alistair. I was a teacher. I never intended to be a teacher. I don't quite know how that happened. I was very cross to be told at school in a careers interview that I'd be a great teacher or nurse, and I was so cross because I was like, that's what you tell all the girls. So how I ended up being a teacher, I don't really know, but I discovered I loved it. And I loved taking my class outdoors, where whatever age I worked with, I knew that we did great learning when we were outside. When I ended up in early years, I discovered that was the most exciting place to be because children are mega competent and creative and imaginative, but the restrictions of the curriculum were less. So I loved being in early years. I discovered forest school and then escaped to the woods, and I didn't go back. So that's the short story. But I've also been very involved in youth work, in voluntary youth work, and working with autistic young people, and finding out how forest school really makes a difference for everybody. Yes, so now I run forest school training, and I get to be involved nationally with the Forest School Association as the current chair, and I get to work with lots of different organisations, enabling them to bring outdoor learning and nature connection to the work that they're doing. So I think for me, forest school is one of the most exciting ways that we have to connect children with nature, but I know that there are many others as well.
And really look forward to exploring some of that amazing impact on that outdoor learning can have as we go through the podcast. And also, I was an accidental teacher and an accidental early years teacher, but it ended up just being, the best job in the world. Mel, can you do the same and just let us know a bit about you?
Hello. So I am currently split between being an academic and a consultant as well as a practitioner. So I lecture and research at Bath Uni in early childhood and environmental humanities. And I came into that through working on my forest school research for my PhD, which came out of running practice, and I just got the research bug that way. And another way I got the research bug was working in early years actually as an environmental artist and educator a long way back. And after, a bit like Sarah, having worked with other age groups, I just found, I think is it their magical thinking, or is it their ability to just get inspired by the world around them in ways that are just brilliant to be around. So I absolutely loved being around young children in that way. So I helped set up the Forest School Southwest Network, and that's a peer-to-peer led Skillshare network, and I'm currently developing peer support for Forest School practitioners as well. So lots of ways. I think my research shows that they're quite isolated quite often, and I think that's the same for a lot of different practitioners. So hopefully people listening to this podcast, it's one of the ways that you can feel less isolated, isn't it? Is to tune in and listen to others of a like mind and get inspired.
Absolutely. And I think in the modern world we live in, there are lots of negative bits around the kind of Pinterest and Instagram culture that we can get sucked into as practitioners, but the positives are that we can really share good practice, especially around something like outdoor provision and forest schools approach, which I know some settings still find quite challenging for a variety of reasons, which hopefully we'll dig into a bit in this podcast. I love the fact, Mel, you talk about magical thinking in the early years, because I think that is the essence of what the beginnings of the education journey are. And a lot of what we talked about in other podcast episodes is about how the outdoors is the perfect place to enhance that magic and to create that magic. It doesn't have to be adults with a feely bag going, oh, I've got something in my bag. I mean, it can be, but if you're outside and the wind is rustling through the trees, or you've got drips that are going down the back of your neck, or you've seen a frog, or whatever it may be, that's where some real proper magic comes. So in this episode, what I'd like to do is just for us together to try and unpick and explore some of the kind of main key principles around forest schools. So for people who aren't aware, kind of what is it and how does it impact on children's development?
Well, I like to summarise the principles down to that it's play-based, it's outdoors and regular through the seasons. And that for me kind of sums it up in a nutshell. And which is a topical phrase, isn't it? But I think there's a range of different sites that it can happen in, which is also an important thing. But it has got these key 6 principles that are drawn up. And I'll hand over to Sarah to talk about that because she's the current chair of the Forest School Association.
Well, thank you. And I've got the Forest School Association cheat sheet for the principles, which is here.
I love that.
That comes with the brilliant book, Growing a Forest School from the Roots Up, that the Forest School Association has created to support anyone who wants to find out about forest school. So the principles, I usually have a little suitcase and I bring out an object and talk about each individual principle, but I'm gonna cheat with the cheat sheet. They are, the 6 principles are, there's long term, and that's about children being able to revisit their learning, exploring things at their own pace, creating new relationships with others and the environment and themselves, feeling comfortable to take risks and practicing new skills. So that happens over a long period of time. It's like anything. It's, to get a really good, deep relationship, you need time to build it. And one of the key parts of that is nature connection. So children are, whoever goes out, because we know forest school is used with all ages, adults, children, babies, families. But the nature connection is about helping us relax and de-stress. We know all about the health benefits of being in nature, especially after the pandemic. Finding out that we are nature and where we fit in the world. Discovering new learning opportunities. Retaining knowledge. Nature connection is really valuable for that. Our brains work better. Using natural materials outdoors. Our hands and bodies, it's multi-sensory, and valuing nature. That's why we need to be out there. Risk-taking, I've already mentioned that. Risk-taking is a really powerful element of forest school, which isn't necessarily in lots of other outdoor learnings. It's about overcoming vulnerability and fear, building resilience, knowing what scared feels like and how to manage that, exploring abilities, taking us to the edge of what's possible, assessing risks and managing risks so that children know how to keep themselves safe. When I'm training people, I always say if we don't let children learn to manage risk when they're 3 and 5 and 6 and 10, they don't know how to do it when someone asks them to hotwire a car.
Yeah.
And they know how to challenge themselves. And we know children are brilliant at that naturally. Adults just get in the way and stop their learning happening. Being learner-centred or participant-centred, we know teachers are brilliant at this, but often the curriculum is challenging us and pulling us away from that. So Forest School gives us a space where we're able to let our learners really take control of their learning, explore their own motivations, build confidence and experience, solve problems, ask questions and have time to find the answers themselves, and learn how to learn. That's what I love. One of the things I really love about Forest School. The holistic aspect of Forest School is one of the reasons I believe it's fitted so well within early years. But it's all about how do we create and develop a human being who is great at being a human being, an effective human being. So that's vitally important, particularly around emotional literacy. And, we talk about building resilience and confidence and those things. Often, I do remember when I was teaching, being told that children weren't allowed to come in from the playground and talk about what had happened at playtime because there wasn't time. But unless we actually listen to children and we don't accept what life is like for them and respond to how life is, we're not enabling them to learn well. And Forest School gives us that space. And I love that about Forest School. And then this is top notch, this one. The last one is that we have qualified and reflective leaders. And that for me, and I know a lot of your work, Mel, is around that. How do we really understand what that means? How do we model behaviour and communication? How do we acknowledge the stuff that we do well and the stuff that we've messed up about? And how do we model that we are learners ourselves? And I know many schools are brilliant at saying it's a learning community and everyone in the school is learning and the teachers are learning all the time and talking about their learning. But often that doesn't happen. And Forest School gives adults a space when they come to train to be practitioners to actually question why do they do things the way that they do them. And it is very much about growing holistically as practitioners. And when we're in schools, often it can be quite hard to pay attention to what we need. And I think Forest School does that very well. It actually asks everybody who's involved in Forest School to be part of that learning and reflection. That was a lot.
Absolutely. And I think, it's a lot. And it's great, though. And it kind of gets the nub of what it's all about. And I think, Forest Schools is being a growing kind of tribe over time. And also, like lots of other things in education, what you don't want it to be is tokenistic. So people say, we do Forest Schools, and actually it's not Forest Schools that they do. So I think part of that is understanding the why behind the benefits. But also we've become very classroom centric in terms of education, when actually children's development is often linked to that kind of more gross motor, emotional literacy development, which is far better placed in an outdoor space where you can become physically and emotionally literate, which is far more difficult to do if you're sitting on a carpet or sitting at a table. But I think we'll dig a little deeper, I think, into some of the essence of that qualified adult and what they bring, and what is Forest Schools as opposed to just going outside, and finding a leafy space. But one of the things that's often said to me is it's all well and good, but we haven't got a forest. So, or we haven't even got woods, or we haven't even got a bush. So how can we adopt a kind of Forest Schools approach, or can we adopt a Forest Schools approach if we haven't got an inverted commas forest at our disposal? Mel, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have. I think it's the biggest challenge that faces Forest Schools in the UK, because we have so many challenges and inequities in accessing land and space. We have, compared to other countries, a very limited set of options. So we have a lot of land that's owned by the church or the state or private landowners or farms that we can't access without arrangements. And one of the biggest challenges to setting up new Forest Schools is around sites, and practitioners not being able to join up the dots and find sites that they can use. And I know that there's been some really innovative practice around this that's kind of thought of some lateral solutions to this. I know that the London Early Years Foundation, for example, they have a really useful way of sharing outdoor space, or looking at whatever they can find, whether it's putting in roof gardens for children as well in urban areas. And it's also, I think, really important to remember that it was early years practitioners that coined the phrase Forest School in the UK, that we have them to thank, and we have the good practice that comes out, and the ethos that comes out of the early years, that regard for children and their ability to lead their own learning and to explore and test their own mastery. In Denmark, we say that Forest School came from Nordic roots, which is not necessarily true. It was partly inspired by that, but we also have a rich tradition in the UK. But I like to refer to the fact that Denmark quite pragmatically created what what they did, which wasn't necessarily called Forest School, because they had a need for more childcare places. And so they just went, okay, well, let's run some outside then, because we haven't got the, super simple, super pragmatic. And wouldn't it be brilliant? This is my big provocation, is wouldn't it be brilliant if we had that kind of joined up thinking, where we know that there's a need, where a local authority has done a sort of sufficiency assessment and said, we need some more childcare places in this county or in this unitary authority. And then they think, well, okay, how can we do that? Let's use some of this brownfield site and regenerate it. So look at regenerative pedagogy as well as regenerative land practice at the same time. So it's not like we've got a shortage of land. We've just got a shortage of imagination about how to use it. And in the meanwhile, while we're waiting for that magic to happen, I think the main thing that we need to do is some joined up thinking and get out and talk to people. And a lot of people find their sites by simply, as one practitioner said, I just got on my bike and I cycled around and I talked to everybody I met, So you might not have the time to do that, but you need to put the word out and start sending out the smoke signals to say, we're really looking for land. Has anybody got any? And it might even be like the graveyard behind a church, or it might be somebody's got a really big garden. There's so many different ways that you can use a bit of space. And the main thing is that it's as close as possible. And that can be a challenge in some really built up areas. So I think also it doesn't have to be green. It doesn't have to be woodland. Ideally, it is, because it's in the name. But the main thing is that you start somewhere and ideally as close to your setting as possible, because then it's practical. If you can walk there, all the better.
So, okay. And amazingly, we're getting to the end of our first episode. Of course we are. So I think what we're kind of saying, and we'll explore this as we go through in future episodes, is that there is a principle around forest schools, which is what Sarah's talked about. And those principles are embedded in the benefits of children learning in the outdoors. In an ideal scenario, we want maximum opportunity for that learning to take place, which could happen in a forest where you can get shelter and trees and habitats and animals and all sorts of different, things for children to work with. But fundamentally, you can embed a lot of the forest school principles in a variety of outdoor spaces with a bit of careful thought and some planning.
Yeah, and you don't have to start with forest school. It's a distinct approach. But if you're getting outside and you're having fun and the children are getting benefits, it can be part of your long-term plan. As long as you can start by getting outside. And I think the forest kindergarten qualification that's come out of Scotland is really beneficial and sort of brings us back to its roots that we have in the UK of more real world learning. And just, even just walk into the shop with the kids to buy a pint of milk is a start.
And it's an outdoor experience. Fab. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop this episode there. In the next episode, we're going to dig a little deeper, just in that exact point that Mel just made then, about the benefits for children in that kind of outdoor experience, whatever that may be. But for today, thank you very much for your thoughts and inspiration. I'm really looking forward to recording the rest of these because it's a fascinating subject. Thank you, Sarah and Mel.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
I just want to say a massive thank you to our guests today, Mel and Sarah, for joining us and providing such brilliant and invaluable insights. So you've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and with Mel McCree and Sarah Lawfull. So if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget you can sign up via the link in the episode notes, and that will mean you're the first to hear about future episodes, but also you'll get access to some exclusive follow-up content that will include things like ideas for your setting, but also some Pinterest boards that will help you to shop for forest school resources.